The queen stood on the balcony of her marble palace, watching the captured soldier dragged before her. His eyes burned with defiance, not fear. Little did she know, he was no ordinary prisoner. He was a spy of the enemy, and the man who would change her fate. The marble columns rose high above the throne room, bathed in torchlight that flickered across gilded walls. Courtiers whispered among themselves, their silks rustling like leaves in a storm. The sound of iron boots echoed sharply as the prisoner was forced forward, wrists bound in chains, his steps stubbornly steady despite the bruises that marked his jaw. "Name," the queen demanded, her voice smooth as tempered steel. She stood in her crimson cloak, crown set lightly on her dark hair, her gaze unyielding. The soldier lifted his chin. "Call me whatever you like, Majesty. Traitor. Dog. Enemy. It makes no difference." His voice was low, a rough edge beneath its calmness, like gravel beneath velvet. The court hissed. How dare a captive speak so boldly? But the queen did not flinch. Instead, her lips curved, almost imperceptibly. "Defiance in chains is still weakness," she replied. "Do you think your courage makes you different from the others?" A smirk flickered across his face. "Perhaps I am not like the others." It was a dangerous reply, too dangerous. Yet something in the way he said it stirred a strange curiosity within her. His accent was familiar, the tone too refined for a common foot soldier. And his eyes, dark, unyielding, were not the eyes of a man broken by capture. They were eyes hiding something. "Search him again," the queen ordered. Guards fumbled through his worn tunic and armor scraps, finding nothing but a small dagger with strange markings on its hilt. Her captain, a broad man with a scar down his cheek, stepped forward. "Majesty, this one fought differently. He took down 4 men before we bound him. He's no ordinary soldier. I say he is dangerous, kill him now." The queen descended the marble steps, her cloak whispering against the floor. She stopped only inches from the prisoner, tilting her head as she studied him. "Dangerous men are often useful. Tell me, soldier, why should I spare your life?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because one day you'll need me. And when that day comes, you'll regret it if I'm not here." The hall erupted into murmurs. Arrogant. Insulting. Madness. Yet the queen only stared, her heartbeat unsteady for the first time in years. "Take him to the cells," she said finally, her voice calm. "He amuses me." Gasps swept the chamber, but the guards obeyed. Chains rattled as they pulled him away, his eyes lingering on hers until the heavy doors shut. That night, long after the torches were dimmed, the queen sat by her window overlooking the silent city. She told herself it was foolish to think of him, a captured soldier who should have been a footnote in her empire's wars. But his words repeated in her mind, "Because one day you'll need me." Far below, in the damp darkness of the palace cells, the soldier sat against the stone wall, a faint smile on his lips. His mission had been clear: infiltrate the palace, win their trust, gather secrets for the empire's enemies. But as he remembered the fire in her eyes, he realized something he had not prepared for. This was no ordinary queen. And for the first time since he had donned the disguise of a loyal soldier, the spy felt something shift in his chest. Not strategy. Not survival. Something far more dangerous. Something that could undo them both. The dungeons of the palace reeked of damp stone and rusted iron. Torches spat weak light across narrow corridors, where prisoners groaned behind their bars. Most had the hollowed eyes of men broken by hunger and fear, but not him. He sat in the corner of his cell, back against the wall, arms resting casually on his knees as if the chains around his wrists were mere ornaments. His breathing was steady, his gaze sharp, like a wolf waiting for the right moment to strike. The rattle of armored boots broke the silence. A single lantern bobbed closer, throwing shadows across the wall. The prisoner didn't move until the figure stopped in front of his cell. It was her. The queen, cloaked in midnight blue, without her crown, but still unmistakable. The guards stood back at her gesture, the air thick with the scent of iron and authority. For a long moment, she said nothing, only studied him with eyes that had measured kings and sentenced traitors. "You wear chains, yet you sit as though you own this place," she said finally, her voice a whisper that cut sharper than a blade. "Tell me, soldier, what makes you so certain you matter?" He raised his head slowly, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Because you came here. Alone. Her eyes narrowed. Dangerous. Too observant. Too clever. Yet she didn't leave. Instead, she stepped closer, until the bars were all that separated them. You speak like a man who has secrets. Every man has secrets, he said smoothly. Yours must be heavy, Majesty. Ruling with iron leaves little room for the heart. The Queen's breath caught, just for an instant. No one spoke to her like that, not her council, not her generals, not even her closest advisors. They saw her as unshakable stone. But this soldier, this stranger, spoke as though he could see through her. Careful, she warned, her voice hardening. Words like that could cost you your tongue. Perhaps, he said, leaning forward, his eyes locking with hers through the bars. But it made you pause. For a long silence, the dungeon seemed to breathe around them. Her guards shifted uneasily, uncertain whether to drag her away or silence him. But the Queen only stepped back, her expression unreadable. Your arrogance will be your undoing, she said, turning sharply. But until then, you will remain here. He let out a low laugh as she left. Until then, Majesty. Days passed, but he stayed lodged in her mind. In council, as generals debated strategies, she found her thoughts wandering to his boldness, his strange confidence. He was unlike any man she had met, neither fawning noble nor trembling servant. A soldier, yet something more. When she ordered the guard to keep him alive, the whispers in the palace grew. Why spare an enemy? Why visit him in the dark? Her captain, stern and watchful, voiced his doubts. Majesty, he is no ordinary prisoner. He looks at you like he knows something we do not. And he was right. For the soldier carried a truth no one in the palace suspected. He was no soldier of her empire. He was a spy. At night, in the silence of his cell, he went over his mission again. Infiltrate, observe, weaken. Gain her trust, so the empire's enemies could strike where she was most vulnerable. But with each passing day, with every glance into her cold yet unbroken eyes, he found the mission harder to cling to. She was supposed to be a target. Instead, she was becoming something else entirely, something dangerous, something he could not betray without betraying himself. And he feared it was already too late. The night of the feast began like any other, wine flowing, courtiers gossiping, the air thick with incense and deceit. The Queen sat at the head of the long marble table, her face carved in its usual mask of composure, though her mind remained troubled. Ever since the soldier's capture, she had felt her thoughts wandering, caught between suspicion and a strange, dangerous pull she could not explain. Her council toasted to victories, generals bragged of campaigns yet to come. Music filled the vaulted hall, lutes and flutes dancing beneath the laughter. Yet the Queen's instincts stirred uneasily. Something was wrong. She caught it first, a flicker of movement on the upper balcony. A shadow that didn't belong. Her guards were too busy with their cups to notice. Her breath caught too late. An arrow loosed. Time seemed to freeze, the deadly shaft slicing through the golden torchlight, aimed straight at her. But before she could react, a blur moved from the edge of the hall. Chains rattled, steel clanged. The soldier, her prisoner, burst forward, slamming into her chair and pulling her hard against him. The arrow struck the marble pillar inches from where her head had been, splintering stone into dust. Gasps tore through the hall. Panic erupted. Guards scrambled, swords screeched from their sheaths, courtiers screamed. The Queen staggered to her feet, heart racing, staring at the man who still shielded her with his body. His wrists were raw from broken chains, his chest rising and falling like a storm. You, she whispered, shaken. He smirked, as if saving her life was no more difficult than a jest. I told you, Majesty. One day you'd need me. The hall trembled with shouts. The captain stormed forward, face red with fury. Traitor. Assassin. He must have planned this. Steel pressed against the prisoner's throat as guards swarmed him, but he didn't flinch. His eyes were only on her. Majesty, the captain spat, give the order. He is a spy. He is working with whoever sent that arrow. The Queen's breath was ragged, her pulse a drum in her ears. Logic demanded she condemn him, he had been captured, defiant, suspicious. The council had whispered it for weeks. And yet, without him, she would already be dead. Enough. Her voice cut like a blade through the chaos. Put him back in chains. He lives, by my command. The court erupted in outrage. The captain's jaw tightened, but he bowed, obeying. The guards dragged the soldier away, though his smirk never faltered, even with blades at his back. Later, in the silence of her private chamber, the queen stood before the mirror, fingertips brushing her neck where the arrow would have struck. For the first time in years, fear had touched her, and he had been the one to take it away. She tried to harden her thoughts. He could still be a spy. He could still be her enemy. But the memory of his arms pulling her from death burned against her skin. Down in the dungeon, he leaned back against the wall of his cell, the taste of iron and smoke still on his tongue. He knew the suspicion was growing, too fast, too soon. Saving her had been reckless, a crack in his perfect disguise. But as he closed his eyes, he felt the ghost of her against him, the way her breath had caught when she looked into his face. And he realized with bitter clarity, his mission was no longer his own. The council chamber burned with fury the next morning. Generals and senators filled the marble hall, voices colliding like swords clashing in battle. "He is a spy," roared General Cassian, slamming his fist against the polished table. How else would he know the exact moment to leap? How else would he be so well placed to save you, Majesty? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The queen sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of calm, though her hands tightened on the golden arms of her chair. "Then explain," she said evenly, her eyes sweeping across the men, "why I am still alive." The silence was sharp. None dared answer. Cassian's jaw worked furiously. "Majesty, if you keep him alive, you gamble with Rome itself. The people already whisper of your fascination." His lip curled, as if the word itself was a poison. Her gaze snapped to him, cold as the edge of a blade. "My fascination is survival, General. And until one of you can stand before me with the speed and courage he showed, I suggest you swallow your pride." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. She dismissed them with a wave of her hand, though she felt their eyes linger, heavy with doubt and something darker, envy. That night, unable to rest, she found herself descending again into the depths of the dungeon. The guards shifted nervously but obeyed when she ordered them to leave. Lantern light flickered across the cell bars, painting his figure in gold and shadow. He rose when she approached, his chains clinking faintly. His eyes, dark and steady, found hers. "You should have let them kill me," he said softly. Her brow arched. "Why?" "Because now they'll come for you through me." His lips twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. "I am your weakness now. And they know it." Her chest tightened at the words, though she masked it with a scoff. "You think highly of yourself for a man in chains." "I think clearly," he countered, stepping closer to the bars. His voice dropped low, steady, dangerous. "You don't trust me. You shouldn't. But you can't kill me either. That binds us tighter than any chain." The queen's breath caught. His presence filled the narrow cell, his defiance unbroken despite the bruises, despite the suspicion that shadowed every corner of the palace. He was right, he had become something she could neither destroy nor release. Her hand brushed against the cold iron bars between them. "Tell me who you truly are." A pause. His jaw flexed, his eyes burning as though caught between two wars. "I am the man who saved your life." She searched his face, her instincts screaming that there was more. But for reasons she could not name, she didn't press. When she turned to leave, his voice followed her, low and certain. "Majesty, you won't survive what's coming without me." She froze at the doorway, but did not look back. Above the dungeon, the council plotted. The generals whispered of his execution, though no proof tied him to the assassins. Public death would spark outrage, the queen had spared him, and the people already murmured of the mysterious soldier who had saved their ruler. So Cassian devised another way. If they could not prove him a spy, they would bury him in the war itself. The front lines. The order would be framed as mercy, a chance for the queen's pet soldier to redeem his honor. But they all knew what it truly meant. A death sentence dressed in glory. The dawn broke blood red across the horizon, as if the gods themselves had painted the sky in warning. The queen stood at the balcony once more, but this time her eyes were fixed on the courtyard below, where soldiers gathered in formation. At the center of them all was the man who had saved her, his chains replaced with armor. The irony twisted bitter in her chest. They had dressed his punishment as honor. She had fought against the decision until her voice grew hoarse, but Cassian and the Senate had pressed their verdict like a blade to her throat. If you protect him, the Empire will believe you compromised. If you let him go, at least his death will silence their suspicions. And so, she had relented. Or at least appeared to. From her high vantage, she watched as he adjusted the leather straps of his armor. There was no fear in his movements, only a calm certainty, as though he had expected this all along. When he looked up, his eyes found hers instantly. No salute. No bow. Just that burning, unflinching stare. It rattled her more than any battlefield scream. Later that day, she descended once again to the dungeon, this time, empty of him. The cell was colder without his presence, the silence oppressive. She touched the iron bars where her fingers had lingered nights before. A voice stirred behind her. "You've grown too close. Cassian." He stepped into the torchlight, his face carved with suspicion. "You can't hide it from me, Majesty. You've let him into your thoughts. Perhaps into your heart." She turned, her fury sharp as a drawn blade. "You forget yourself, General." He bowed his head only slightly, more mockery than respect. "I only remind you of duty. Rome cannot afford a queen blinded by infatuation." She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "Careful, Cassian. You speak as though you command me." He did not flinch. "Someone must. Before it's too late." Their gazes locked, an invisible war fought in silence. At last, he turned on his heel and left, but his final words lingered in the cold air. "When he dies out there, Majesty, so will this foolish weakness of yours." That night, unable to shake the weight pressing on her chest, she summoned her most trusted handmaiden, Aurelia. "Prepare a rider," she whispered, pacing the marble floor of her private chamber. "A message must reach him before he marches into their trap." Aurelia hesitated. "A message, my queen? What would you have me tell him?" The queen's hand trembled as she gripped the window frame, staring out into the storm-dark sky. "Tell him, not to die." But the message never reached him. The courier was intercepted on the road by cloaked men loyal not to the queen, but to Cassian. The letter was burned, the rider silenced. By dawn, the soldier marched at the front of the column, carrying not only the weight of his hidden mission, but also the unknown truth that the queen had already chosen him, even if she did not yet understand it. As the army disappeared into the misty horizon, she remained at her balcony, her nails digging into the marble rail. The sky bled with morning light, and for the first time, the queen whispered a prayer not for Rome, but for a single man. Her enemy. Her spy. Her savior. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke curled into the sky like black fingers, the clash of steel rang across the valley, and the cries of dying men filled the air. At the very front of the carnage, the captured soldier, spy, warrior, traitor, and now something far more, moved like a storm among them. His sword cut arcs of silver light through the haze, his body honed by years of training meant not for Rome's glory, but for its destruction. And yet, every stroke, every kill, every desperate breath he drew was no longer for the empire he secretly served. It was for her. The queen. The thought of her watching from the marble palace, believing him gone forever, burned inside him with a fire fiercer than any oath. By midday, the battle's tide shifted. The Romans pressed forward, pushing their enemies back step by bloody step. Cheers erupted through the ranks, but the soldier did not smile. His instincts screamed something was wrong. And then he saw it. A shadow on the ridge. Hidden cavalry, waiting like wolves in the tall grass. They were positioned perfectly to flank, to tear through the Romans' rear once their forces had advanced too far. It was a trap, designed with precision. A trap meant to break the queen's army and leave her kingdom ripe for conquest. He froze. His mission had been to ensure this very outcome, to let the empire's enemies collapse beneath their own arrogance. This was the moment he had been trained for, the reason he had been planted as a spy. All he had to do was remain silent. All he had to do was let them die. But then he saw Cassian on the ridge opposite, signaling with banners, blind to the danger. He saw young soldiers, barely more than boys, fighting with hope in their eyes. He saw the banner of the Queen whipping in the wind, the golden eagle shining. And he remembered her voice, soft and fierce in equal measure, "Tell him not to die." The choice ripped him apart, but in the end it wasn't really a choice at all. He turned, bellowing across the battlefield with a voice like thunder. "Ambush! To the rear! Shields, now!" The Romans reacted instantly, years of drilled discipline snapping into motion. Lines shifted, shields locked, and a horn blew to signal retreat into formation. The hidden cavalry thundered down, but instead of crushing the army's back, they smashed into a wall of iron and spears. The trap was broken, but his secret was shattered. From the command ridge, Cassian's eyes narrowed. He had not seen the cavalry, no one had. And yet, this prisoner, this spy, had. Too perfectly. Too easily. Cassian's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. "Interesting," he muttered, his suspicion turning to certainty. By nightfall, the Romans held the valley. Fires burned where the dead lay piled, and the wounded cried out for water and mercy. Among the exhausted survivors, the soldier stood blooded but alive, his armor scarred, his blade red. And the whispers began. "He saved us. He saw what no one else could. Without him, we'd all be dead." For the first time, they called him not a prisoner, not an enemy, but a hero. When he returned to the palace days later, the city greeted him with laurel wreaths and cheers. The Queen, standing once more on her balcony, watched as he lifted his eyes to hers. No words were spoken, but the truth stretched between them like an unbreakable thread. He had betrayed his mission. For her. But betrayal carried its own price, and in the shadows, Cassian was already moving. The spy had saved Rome. Now Rome would devour him.